Okay, so we're almost at the end of this day. Hope you gained a lot of new inspiration and ideas. Before we can all enjoy the closing keynote of cake and some nice dinner, of course, there's still one talk to listen here in this room. Last but not least, I present you Remy Appels and Robin Schepers, two of our Dutch Ordina colleagues, both passionate and experienced with Flutter, and they will give you some insights and arguments why Flutter is the way to go if we talk about serious mobile app development. Enjoy the talk.
Thanks. So, services down to the pocket. I hope you all have some energy left for this last talk. Let's start with a short agenda. So, I will start walk you through the why and how mobile makes a difference, responding to a changing market, and how new technology makes this mobile app development accessible for each company. And I will end with some secure mobile development lifecycle. And then my colleague Robin will take over with some more in-depth Flutter app development, how Flutter works, how Dart works, and he will end with live coding. And after we have time to answer some questions. So, who am I? My name is Remy Appels, and I work as Solution Lead Mobile for Ordina Netherlands. I already do app development for more than 10 years, have seen native app development, cross-platform solutions like Xamarin, Cordova, Ionic, and currently working on Flutter projects. Mobile apps. Anytime, anywhere, access to your personal services. Our lives are full of questions and needs. Questions like, what's my pension status? Or, how much money is left in my account? Am I properly insured for this? Or can I buy this house with my salary? Questions for different service providers, a bank, an insurance company, a pension fund, and questions that arise during the day, anywhere, anytime. And questions we want to get answered the moment they arise, actual questions. So the users of today expect services being available, accessible when the demand is current. Services down to your pocket, 24/7, location and time independent. Secure services, low threshold services via an app. So with one touch on the button, scanning your fingerprint or Face ID, directly access to your personal services in a trusted environment. Easy for the younger users that already expect services being available on a mobile phone, or the older, less digital adept users that can be helped by the simplicity, for example, of an iPad. So for anyone. And mobile fits in perfectly. It's a trend we see in the market. For example, the financial service sector focus on mobile users, where first the contact was placed by post office, and then they opened stores all over the country, the call centers where you can wait for hours to get your questions answered, and then they came with the My environment, where you can get your service yourselves. And nowadays, the service should be location independent via mobile phone. So how big is the market for mobile exactly? If we take a look to the internet users of the age between 16 and 65, we see that less than 85% has access to a mobile, to a desktop or laptop, versus more than 95% with the access to a mobile phone. And 90% of the users has access to mobile internet. So those users are accessible anywhere, anytime. And if we take a look to the usage on the phone, we see that 90% of the time is spent inside apps versus 10% in the browser. And from the 10% in the browser, it's most of the time about individual search attempts. So if you want to deliver a service on mobile, you should deliver an app. And this gap between mobile and desktop is getting bigger and bigger each year. So it's very interesting to focus on mobile. But what exactly is the value of mobile? First of all, it's secure. It brings a third factor in authentication because you need to have the device. And scanning fingerprint and Face ID will make it even more secure. It will result in customer binding because it's personal. You deliver the service in a trusted environment, easy to use. It's always available, location and time independent, online, offline, on Android and iOS. It's easy contact, for example, by push notification, a personal message directly to the user. But when we take a look to the users, we see a market share between Android and iOS, almost 50-50, at least in the Netherlands. And we want to reach both of them. So traditionally, we have to develop an app for Android and iOS using Kotlin, using Swift, 2 times the cost, functionality on Android which is not available on iOS. So for that reason, the last 17 years, there have been developed several solutions to solve this problem. Solutions like Xamarin, Cordova, Xamarin Forms, React Native, Flutter, and .NET MAUI. But what exactly are the differences between those solutions? So first of all, let's take a look to Xamarin and React Native. They actually used quite the same approach. So they use a layer between to translate UI components to native components on Android and iOS. So for React Native, they use the React Native framework, JavaScript based. Xamarin, they use the C# with the .NET framework to create those components. For example, text fields. So the text fields will be translated to a native Android text field and a native iOS text field, which will result in the bad compromise in functionality between those two platforms. And also in the layer between, there occur a lot of bugs because the layer between should be updated each time the OS updates. So it's not the ideal situation. And if there is an event popped up by the Android to iOS platform, for example, push notification or location change, this event will also go to the layer between, so it can be backed up in the shared layer. Then let's take a look to Cordova. Cordova uses a different approach. So in Cordova, you create an HTML component, and the HTML component is showed inside a native web view on Android and iOS and displayed to the customer. But still, it's not a native app because it's just a web view inside a native app, and it will interact as being a web view and not a native component. So a bit more laggy. For events, it's actually quite the same as the other cross-platform solutions. So the event will pass the JavaScript bridge and can be picked up in the shared codebase. And then we have Flutter. And Flutter uses a different approach. So there is no layer between to translate those components to native components. There's also no web view. No. Those UIs components called widgets are drawn directly to the screen of the user on Android and iOS. So this will make it possible to control all the pixels on the device layer. But users expect the components to have the same look and feel as native components. So for that reason, Flutter implemented these design systems, Material Design and Cupertino for Android and iOS. So those components will look exactly the same as the native components, and they will interact exactly the same as the native components. Only, those aren't native components. And it's also easy to customize those components. For the events, it's actually the same. So there's a method called method channel, and those will translate the native events so it can be backed up in the shared codebase. So here is a short overview of all the different architectures of the cross-platform solutions and where Flutter differs. So for that reason, when we have to create an app for Android and iOS, at Ordina Netherlands, we choose Flutter as technology. One team, one app, 2 platforms, Android, iOS, and even the possibility for more platforms, macOS, Linux, Windows, and also web. So, a short summary. Flutter, Google's cross-platform UI framework. the most important part, no translation to native OEM widgets, but still a native look and feel, native performance. It's a very low entry for new developers to start with. Build once, run everywhere. Custom UI, easy to create, and still have those smooth transitions, animations, using material design and Cupertino to keep that native look and feel. There is a large engaged community, so it can help you with all your questions. And when a customer already have an application built on native technology, it's easy to start with Flutter because you can just create one new function in Flutter, and it will be you can phase deploy that function to the native part. So what we see here is a technology adoption curve based on Flutter. So before 2018, we started to investigate this new interesting technology. And on the start of last year, we implemented our first big enterprise customer using Flutter, and they are very excited. Nowadays, we are already in version 3.3, and this functionality has proven. But when we create an application for mobile, we should always be prepared for the unknown, because you don't have control on the you don't have control of the user's device, the OS he uses, even you don't know if the application is manipulated. So for that reason, we make security part of our development lifecycle. So we created a mobile-specific application security lifecycle where all security parts are in the development phases. So for example, when we onboard a new project, we are sure that all the team members are familiar with the global security knowledge and mobile-specific knowledge using the OWASP guide. And in all the other steps of the development process, I will not walk through all steps, but if you're interested, I can talk you by later. And to make that happen, we created an automated process we use by our clients, so we can be sure all quality control steps are taken when we create artifacts to deploy to our environments. So now more in-depth Flutter and Dart. So I will give the stage to Ben. Niet heel handig, maar. Deze zo langs. Dit is niet helemaal.
Dank u. Helemaal goed. Ben ik zo te verstaan? Vast wel. Great. So, hello. My name is Robin Shapers. I'm a senior software engineer at Ordina Nederland, or Ordina Netherlands. But I also like to call myself a professional computer nerd. I love to do everything that is somewhere within the computer space. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how you would write Flutter, or how you would implement Flutter. First, let's start with some Dart syntax, because Flutter you don't write in JavaScript or TypeScript. You write it in Dart. And Dart has kind of the feel of TypeScript. So if you know TypeScript, it has something with it. So let's first dive into Dart. As you can see, Dart is fully object-oriented and also fully typed, which means that I have classes, I can extend classes, I can implement classes, etc. You can also see that my first name and last name are typed as a string, which means, well, that they're strings. Next up, we have it doesn't have to be fully object-oriented. You can also write functional code if you want. You can just tell Dart to run a file, and it will search for the main function, and that function will be executed. But there does not need to be a root class around it. The type is inferred, which means that you can use var, just var to declare your variable, and it will infer the type from what it is assigned to. In the first case, my var will at compile time be a person, an instance of a person, so it knows the type is a person. And for the get name, I return a string, which means that Dart already knows that full name should be a string. Which is nice that if you change your code, let's say person is now human, then Dart will, you will not have to change the left side of your assignment to comply with that type change. Dart is sound nil safe, which means that at compile time it checks if there could be nil pointer exceptions. And if there can be nil pointer exceptions, the compiler returns an error. It cannot be like that. So here on line 2, this will throw an error because my string is not nillable. I cannot assign nil to a non-nillable type, which also is on line 4. Since I don't assign anything to it, that means that because I don't assign anything to it, it will be nil, so you will get an error at compile time. On line 3 here, you can see this I declare that a variable can be nil with a question mark behind the type, and that says that it can be nil. Then we have your standard positional arguments. We have a first name and a last name, and you can call them like you would in any other front-end language like TypeScript or JavaScript. But the fun part about Dart syntax is the named arguments. And the named arguments, you can name your variables, and you don't have to specify them in the exact order you want that you declared them. And as you can see, I have to prepend the variable boss now with the named argument boss and a colon. And so you can see that by using named arguments, your code starts to document itself a little bit more. So Dart is very readable in this situation. As you can see, my amount is a nillable int, which means it's by nature optional. I don't have to declare an amount in my function call. You can combine these two. You can combine a positional argument and a named argument. That's fine. As you can see, I have a repository which is required because it's a positional argument. And then I have only a required category. So category is required and the rest is not. Then in classes, you have to initialize your variables, of course. So I have here a superclass which has first name and last name, and you define and you can initialize them by using super dot, which means I want to initialize the fields of the superclass. You can also use this to define properties of the class you're constructing in. So in this case, this team will fill in the string team. Then we have callbacks. Callbacks is a known feature in TypeScript. You can use a short arrow notation if you want. You can use a long notation. And you can just, for the arrow notation, only one operation is allowed. And for the longer notation, you can do multiple operations, and then you can return a value if you so desire. You can fully type your closures. So in this case, onTab is a function or a closure that has no arguments, that doesn't get arguments, and returns a void or nothing. Then we have async await, asynchronous functions, asynchronous code execution, which is very nice for API calls or I/O. If you have a function that can take a little while, you might want to make it asynchronous, so the code stops executing whenever you add await. In this case, the code will wait for brew coffee to finish, and when it returns the value, which should be a mug of type coffee. You can also use, as you are known in TypeScript, the then, in which you can specify a callback function, which will execute whenever brew coffee is done in this case. Error handling, very nice, is for async await, you just surround it with a try catch. And there's a catch method if you use then. So you can, well, just like TypeScript, add catch after then. Then we have a neat function called the cascading operator. The cascading operator is telling that whatever is being returned by whatever function I'm calling, whatever is returned should be ignored. I don't need that, and just continue using whatever I was using, whatever I was calling the function on. So in this case, after add attendee, I still have my meeting. After mute, I still have my meeting, and I can return a meeting because everything that is used here with the double dot notation gets ignored after it's been called. Which is nice, so you don't have to return this like in some languages. So let's go to Flutter a little bit. This is Dart. This is how you write Dart. Let's go to Flutter a little bit. That's widgets and widgets and widgets and, well, so on. So here you see the most basic Flutter app. This is all you need to write, except for one line which has the main function and a function that calls run app with an instance of this class. That's all you need to do. This will run a Flutter app. And as you can see, there's not really much to it. I have a material app, which is a widget, and I have in there a home page. And this home page says my home page will be the text widget, and the text widget has to display hello world. You will see you get a page which is black, red text, large text, yellow underline. It's not that pretty. So what Flutter does is, for a page, you usually want to start out with a scaffold. So as you can see, I just put a scaffold in between those. Scaffold has a body in this case, and in the body I put my text widget with hello world in it. But as you can see, scaffold is also a widget. You can see how you're going to be building on this widget tree. So now my text is in the top left. It's not very readable. I want to have it a little bit bigger. I want to have it blue. So what do I do? I surround my text widget with a center widget to center it, and then supply some text style to make the text a little bit more vibrant in this case. So again, another widget. And this is how you build Flutter apps. It's time to do some coding and see how fast I can build an app in 15 minutes. But first, if you want to contact us, have questions after, excuse me, here's our contact information. All right. Yep. So after you installed the Flutter SDK, after you've installed the Flutter SDK, you will, it's a little too low. Oh well. So after you've installed the Flutter SDK, you will get some commands, and one of the commands is Flutter. And if you want to create a new project using Flutter, you can just download Android Studio and follow the steps in Android Studio. But if you want to have if you want to create a Flutter app, you can also in your terminal just type Flutter space create space and whatever name you want your Flutter app to be, and it will just create a folder structure. You open it in VS Code or Android Studio or whatever. And you click run, and then you have a Flutter app, which is the most basic counter app that you will start out with. Very nice. So what I usually do, Mac does not have window snapping, nice. Kind of. I'm usually on Linux, so that's why. Let's see, it does have window snapping, right? Like this. Was het? Oh, zo was het, ja. Dat is hem. All right. Nice. So here we have our basic app. Our basic app consists of this void main, which I already told you about, is the piece of code that starts to run the first widget. The first widget is this My App widget. That is a stateless widget, and you also have stateful widgets if you want to have a widget that has some kind of data that needs to be remembered, which is very nice for whenever you are developing. There is hot reloading in Flutter, and hot reloading is a very nice feature in which whenever you press save, your changes will become available instantly. So if you develop on your phone, I mean, I just exported it or run it as a macOS app. You can do that. But if you export it to your phone, or if you debug on your phone, doesn't really matter which phone, an Android or iOS. Whenever you save the app, your changes will be available immediately. You don't have to rebuild the app, which is a neat feature. I'm going to start out with removing a lot of this boilerplate code so I can show you a little bit. I'm not gonna use these. I'm not gonna use this whole class. And I'm gonna go back to my text widget that says hello world. And then saving it. There's the app I had at the beginning. And as you remembered, I had to put in a scaffold to make it a little bit nice. So I can wrap this with a widget, which is a scaffold widget. Oh, jeez.
Use a lighting.
Ja, je kan die editor lighting zetten van je studio.
Waar? Jij weet het.
Hoop ik. Waar zit je?
Well, if I add the scaffold, it will turn white, so it's.
Oh, my OS is.
If you press the gear icon, you should get the theme in the left bottom corner. There you can, yeah.
Color theme. Ah, yeah.
Lights.
There. It's blinding to your eyes. Ah! And the parameter or the argument for scaffold is not called child. That's the most standard way of calling a child widget. In this case, it is body. And then save that. And then we have the starter widget we had just now. Nice. So the thing I like to do is I create review widgets, and there's a couple of people in this room that already have seen me build a review app. So I'm sorry for those people. So to create some reviews, I want to have a title for my app, and using the material package, I can very easily use the material design system. One of the things that a material design system has is an app bar. So in my scaffold is a parameter that I can call that's called an app bar, and I can add an app bar widget into there. And the app bar widget has a title, and this title should also be a text widget. This text widget should contain my title. And now I have a nice app bar with a title. And then you'll see me add some commas. This is for the Dart auto formatter, or I'm using commas. Things will space into different lines. All right. So we now have this nice app bar, but I would like to add some reviews. So for my body, I want to have things that are stacked underneath each other. So I will start out with a column, which is just the way to stack things underneath each other. And the column has children. And in these children I can, well, add stuff. So things I want to have underneath each other are what in material design is called a card. So I have a card widget, and in this card widget I have of course a child. And what I want in this card is on top a title, maybe a subtitle, and then some text, or maybe an image, but I'm not going to add images now because it's not my computer. So again, a column, because I'm putting things on top of each other. The column has children. So for my title, there's this very nice widget that's called a list tile, list tile. And a list tile has a title and a subtitle. So I'm just adding those, title. So for my first review, and title should be a widget, so again, the text widget. Let's do The Witcher 3. I usually start with that. Nice, we have a card that's showing now. I want to review a lot of different things, so I'm also going to add a category here, which I'm going to do with the subtitle, which is a part of the list tile widget. And this also accepts a text widget. Okay. As you might have noticed, I stopped being able to type once people are watching me. Nice, now we have a subtitle. Very nice. And normally I would have added added an image here, but so underneath here I can add some text, because in the list of children I can add a text if I would want to. So a very good game. Nice. And underneath that, I want a button to a next page that displays me a little bit more about my about this review. Oh, and don't mention the squiggly lines in there are they want me to use a constant because that's compiler friendly. So it's not really an error, but more a hint. So I'm going to also add a button bar, because I want to have a bar with buttons, of course, that has, again, children. And one of these buttons is a text button, which has nothing for on press. As you can see, on press is the callback that happens whenever you click on the button, which has interesting behavior I'm going to be talking about. This text button, of course, has a child, which is, of course, a text widget. Text with the text read more. More. Now we'll save this. Now we have a button that says read more. And to be a little more neat, I'll add some commas so the text is a little bit nicer spaced. So now we have now we have one of my review cards. As you might have noticed, this button is clickable, but it doesn't do anything because the onPressed function is empty. A very cool little trick here is a button that does not have a function, that does not have an onPressed function is disabled. Which means that I can change this onPressed function to a nil, save it, and now my button is disabled. So that's how you do that. There's no disabled parameter here. All right, let's change it back to a button that does nothing. Cool. So you would imagine that I would write a lot of reviews, and one thing I can, it's the card. Minimize it so I can copy it. So all right, that didn't work. Nice. Okay, let's do it like that. So I'm going to add a lot of cards now. Of course, you'd want to do this with a data source. So if I add a lot of cards, you can see that I get a very nice error. And this error says, and it's very small, but I'm going to read it to you, bottom overflowed by 1500 pixels. Well, the bottom indeed overflowed because Flutter says to a widget, that's kind of how it works, from the root widget it says you have this amount of space, go to town, how much space do you want? And the widget tells then, I want this amount of space because I have this amount of content. It bubbles down, then it knows what content, how big the widget is going to be. But Flutter does not know, in this case, after I've defined my column to be over 1500 pixels long, Flutter does not know that I really want this list to be scrollable. So instead of a column, I would use, I have to go all the way back up. So instead of a column, I would not use a column in this case, but I would use a list view. Save it, and now it's scrollable. So I can now scroll through my reviews. And here's some nice optimization, because if you use a list view, it will only render the widgets that are currently into view. So it keeps being quick. That's nice. All right, so it's a lot of a lot of reviews. I don't need so much reviews, so I'm going to remove all of them again. And that is, like my colleague just said, that's probably all I have time for now. But you can see how quick I could write. In just 15 minutes, I already got this amount of app already working. And I can assure you that in another 15 minutes, I also have a second page with navigation in there. And with another 15 minutes, I could also write some kind of data source that gets these reviews from an API and then puts them in here and then saves them in the state so that it doesn't have to reload it constantly. But that's for another time. Then are there any questions left? Yes?
On line 11, you say return material app.
Yes.
Does that mean that it will only run for material design, or?
Yes. There's also a Cupertino app for the Cupertino package, which means that if I would use that, this whole thing would transform into something that looks like an iOS device. But there's also a nice package that's called platform widgets, and if you use the platform widgets, it will automatically select the right widget for the platform you are on at that moment. So if you're on iOS, you will get the Cupertino widgets, and if you're on Android, you will get the material widgets.
You can also use it without, but then you have to design and develop everything yourself. So
True.
this is very easy.
Yep.
So, follow-up question, does that
Yeah.
mean that, well, iOS and Android, they look differently, they do stuff different, like for example, some put it on top, some put it below.
They could, yeah.
Does that mean you need to, in some cases, define it twice or design it twice? Does Flutter
Flutter handles it like if you use a material app, it will use the material design. If you use the Cupertino app, it will use the Cupertino. If you use platform widgets, you can instead use platform app, and then there is logic in that package that will change the widget depending on what platform you're on. So, like I said, so you could, if you wanted to, write a check in here that says, if I'm on iOS, then add a Cupertino app. If I'm on Android, add a material app. You could write that logic yourself, but don't reinvent the wheel where you don't need to.
It's not automatically. So
It's not automatic.
So most of the time
Yes.
you create, for example, a template for iOS and Android, and you reuse some of the widgets inside those templates.
Yep.
So you could take part of it, define it as a var.
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Coming back to, let's say, I want to have my own style design, whatever, material design.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to actually build an app in Flutter, having its own look and feel.
It is just because Flutter gives you material and Cupertino, but you can, of course, use your own design system. And the fun fact about whole of Flutter is it's completely open source. I could, if I wanted to, just go to the definition of the material app, just copy paste it into my own, and then change it wherever I want. See, this is in the Flutter package, but it's open source, so you can just edit it if you want.
So if you have your action button, like we know, read more, it's now styled with the material design. You can
Yep.
actually override or take
Yes.
basic and then just change the look and feel of
Yep.
that.
You can indeed change the look and feel of your whole app based on what you want. Here I'm just using material design, but I can decide to not use it.
Yeah, so in material design, you create for example, material app, but you still have to define your own team. So you can define all the specs of your team yourself, or switching teams and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
Yeah, there's in Material App, there is a one that's called theme. And you can specify theme data in here that is a complete, well, how you want your app to look. Say default, blue is default, but you don't have it to be blue. I can specify a theme data and then say I want it to be default to red, and then my app is red. And it's just whenever you use a widget from the Material app, it falls back to the theme unless you specify it otherwise. Any more questions? Looks like everyone is dying. All right, well, let's wrap it up then. Let's go eat. Or watch someone else. You know what? Let's watch the closing keynote and then start some food. Thank you.